everyone. Again, this is Nick Capolanzi, your host. Let's go ahead and get started today talking about the habits of managed service business masters, specifically discussing the topic of simple, structured service offerings. And one of the challenges that you guys have as you either are maybe starting your MSP business and trying to figure out how to devise your service offerings, or maybe you're adding on additional service options and figure out how to structure those. This is one of those things that can kind of make or break that particular offering. And if you get it wrong, it's one of those things where you can literally turn customers away because they just don't get what it is that you're offering, or they just don't like how it's priced. And so the question kind of becomes, how do the managed service masters create their service offerings? And so in this second webinar, in a 6-part series that we're doing over the next, well, I guess it's now in the next 5 weeks. We already did one last week on revenue metrics, and we're going to be doing this one and then 4 more in the 4 coming weeks after this. It's on the habits of master managed services businesses. I'm joined today by Ali Mahmood from SolarWinds MSP, and he and I are going to discuss how to create these simple, structured service offerings in a way that actually helps drive value and hopefully increase your business. So let me first start off by Ali. Let me welcome you. Thank you for joining me today. I'm looking forward to a great conversation with you.
Yeah, thanks, Nick, and welcome everyone.
Yeah, it should be an excellent call today. I think you guys will really like this. Before we do get started, just a couple of housekeeping tips here. We are trying to keep this to around 30 minutes. Last week we went a little longer, maybe 35 minutes or so with some of the questions that were coming in. By all means, if you guys do have questions, put those into the Q&A box. I see some of them. I think we have it listed there as chat. Put it in the Q&A box if you can. I'm trying to keep the minimum number of boxes up on my screen as possible, but feel free while we're even talking to ask a question. We're happy to even answer those during the webcast today, but we're also ways to maybe save some for the end. And then a recording and the slides will be posted for you guys afterwards and sent to you via email. So the first place, Ali, that I really want to talk about, I think, is just the question of pricing. And for you guys in the audience, it really becomes more a question of value than anything else. It isn't just so much about cost. It's about the fact that is it providing enough value for the cost that someone's getting. Now, I see this, and I know Ali agrees with me, as this being one of your greatest challenges. I talked about possibly shunning customers away, and you think about this. If it goes too high, then they're going to go, that's not even worth it what you're offering. And then at the same time, if it's too low, it's the same thing. It's not enough value. When I had a consultancy of my own, I remember charging at the time about $125 an hour for some real high-end enterprise consulting, and I was getting about this much business, this sort of representative of the work I was getting. And it was all very big name customers as an example. And the moment that I changed the rate from $125 to $175 an hour, I suddenly got more business from big customers. Seems a little counterintuitive, but it's this an example of it being too low. They went, oh, that's not the right guy for us. And so it really can be a question there. Ali, thoughts on just getting this right in the balance?
Yeah, I think it's a struggle that, like you said, most MSPs face. And the fact that there are so many MSPs out there now that your customers probably have an MSP or they're getting bids from multiple people, right? So how do you strike that perfect balance? What I will say is the MSPs that I've talked to that are the most successful are the more expensive ones, and they're able to justify that service. And I see a lot of frustration from certain MSPs that there's a new kid in town who's kind of lowballing every offer. The advice I've heard from some of the veterans is that those guys will go out of business, or they're going to have to hike their price at some point because you can't survive on low margins in this world for a long time. So, hang in there, pick the right price, stick with it that works for your business, so you can actually invest in your business and deliver good service to your customers and keep them for the long time.
Yeah, and I think you hit it right on the head when you talk about their most successful ones are actually charging a higher price, if you will, for a given service offering. Yeah, but the key part there that you mentioned was they're able to demonstrate the value, and that's where we want you guys to start. Start with the value and kind of work backwards a little bit to think about what you're actually offering. It isn't so much about customers. There are the customers that just want, I want it for $1. Yeah, okay, that's fine, but in reality, those aren't necessarily even your long-term customers either. You want the ones that see the value that you have. So I've got a couple of other notes here. Just obviously, you don't want to avoid kind of some sticker shock. Don't want to make it so exorbitant. And the fact that there are so many MSPs out there, that does give you an opportunity to try and figure out, kind of getting a pulse of the particular market that you're in and what the cost can be. And then, like I mentioned earlier, the cost itself, the pricing has to communicate the value of your services. Go back to my example of my consultancy that I had many years ago. Even the $125 to the $175 an hour for that high-end consultancy, when I was competing with big names like HP and Dell and so on that were were charging $300 and something an hour. The small price that I was charging in comparison to those guys was communicating a value, and in this case, a lack of value of my services. And the moment I raised my rates, I went, oh, you're actually somebody. Yes, I am somebody, and I was able to get more work just because I struck the right balance there. And I think you kind of also mentioned this a little bit, Ali, but you've got to be seen as a trusted partner here as part of this value that you're putting into your service offering. You want them to see that it's not just, I'll do X and this is the service I'm going to talk about. We'll talk more about the detail here, but you want to be seen as a partner here, that's what the value is that you're bringing. Ali, comments on this so far? Ali, are you mute?
I was. I think being proactive is incredibly important in this game because everybody wants to move to the holy grail of lots of monthly recurring revenue, and you're not going to do that in a reactive state. You're not going to be able to respond to problems, fix them, and charge a fixed fee. You want that ongoing value that you're providing, and the only way to do that is to proactively support your customers and help them grow their business and keep their business running.
So excellent. So you guys in the audience, the question becomes, this is all great. Got it, Nick. Got it, Ali. We have to do a nice, valuable kind of pricing structure. And the question is, how do you price it properly? And so the first thing we want you to do is we want you to kind of start with the customer themselves. This is really kind of important here because the customers that you're dealing with, of course, don't all look exactly the same. You've got things like, like I mentioned, the ones that want it for $1, and some that are really, interested in paying a lot more for the value that they're getting for the dollars that they're spending. But you see here, I've got small and cheap, I've got big and demanding, I've got everything in between. You've had all of these, and you've got to find something where you're really defining which of these customers are you targeting, and then start there, because otherwise you're going to have pricing all over the place that is trying to cater to every customer. And and there's a kind of a rule of thumb in marketing that says if your product is too many things, in this case you have too many different pricing models, if it has just too many things, it doesn't do any one of them very well. And that's what's going to happen with your business. If you start trying to offer too many things, you're not going to do any one of them very well. So you've really got to figure out, who am I targeting and what is it that customer wants? Ali?
Yeah, I mean, if there's one thing I've learned about MSPs is that it's an industry where businesses really do come in all shapes and sizes and different stages of maturity. And Paul Dipple at Service Leadership Index, who's one of the top MSP consultants in the space, he breaks MSPs into the 5 operational maturity levels. So it's really hard to give advice to all MSPs, right? Because everyone's at different stages. Yeah. But I like what Nick said about don't put too much on your plate. Become really good at what you're already good at. Like, become an expert, have all the documentation, the sales materials, all the pricing, everything, really shore that up, and then you can add to your plate. Don't say I'm going to tackle everything and then not be able to communicate that value properly. I don't have a proper presentation that covers it all. So just, know what you're good at and really have the materials to support you in that. And then the only other thing as far as who to target, I would throw in that there are different things like verticals that you can focus on. Then there's different types of people, right? There are tech-savvy small business owners. There are people who are really technology adverse. And be careful about spending too much time with the people who are just going to suck the life out of you and not actually buy your services. Or if you finally manage to close that deal after 6 months, the guy only wants to spend $100 a month with you. So be careful about where you spend your time, and anytime you see a great opportunity for someone who's hungry for technology, needs the support, focus on those people. Try to shy away from the ones that are going to really drain your time and energy.
What's interesting about that is to avoid those kinds of customers. I was smiling and laughing because I've had those in my previous life, owning what was sort of a precursor to MSPs, maybe even 20 years ago kind of a thing, is when you think about what we talked about in the last slide, the value and getting the pricing right, but you're thinking about the value that you're bringing to the customer, in a lot of ways, you can hopefully, if you price it right and you're thinking about the services you're offering and the value that it brings, you can sort of weed out some of those undesirable customers, because they're not going to want to pay what you're charging because they don't see the value in what you offer anyways. And in a lot of ways, I would say that's okay. You guys in the audience, it's okay if they don't see the value because they weren't the right customer. They're going to end up being that one you just talked about, Ali, that $100 a month, the guy who just wants to pay you ad hoc or whatever it is. That's not the customer you want anyway. You want someone who actually sees the value. Would you agree?
Yeah, one of my favorite stories, I talked to the owner of a 30-employee MSP, and he said his litmus test for a good customer is the NDA. So when he sends over to the NDA, if it comes back completely marked up, the person wants to rewrite the whole thing, he fires that customer before he even signs with them. So I just love that story because he's known through experience that anyone who's going to nitpick that much about every little thing you do is not going to be profitable, and they're going to hurt you in the long run. Now, that advice doesn't apply universally to everybody. Maybe it's your first customer and you absolutely need some money to stay afloat. It's just long-term, as you're thinking about growing your business, be really careful about the customers who are going to nickel and dime you for everything.
Yeah, good point. So this definition of the customer you want to target is going to help define a lot of the service offering that you have. A couple things, I'm just going to kind of run through this list that I've got here, but you can see things like the scope of the services that you're providing. You have what is going to be included and what's going to be excluded within that. This sort of ends up kind of almost tying into SLAs and things like that where you define those, but within the scope of services, and I did mention service levels there as well, and that just basically you look at this list, you can see that when you define who the customer is, it helps you actually figure out what is it I have to offer. Because if it's a very large customer, the scope of services might be vastly different than it's a very small. Small customers might want more a la carte price. We're going to talk about a couple tiers of service on another slide or so. And a small customer might want a very small tier of service as an example, versus a large customer wants just, what's the word, a carte blanche, and they want the whole thing done for them because they want to be hands off. It just kind of depends. Ali, thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, when you look at all these different things, the thing that I always think about when it comes to managed services is profitability. And Paul Dipple says that the best MSPs, the most successful MSPs, all have margins that are greater than 60%. I think he says average 63%, something like that. So thinking about that, I look at the scope of services, response time. All of these are things that can drain your profitability. And cash flow is the lifeblood of a managed services business. And if you are not making enough money, if things are eroding your margins, like you're providing too many services for the dollars that you sold it for, your response time is too high for customers that aren't paying you enough, I think that's going to hurt you in the long run, for sure.
Yeah, perfect. So we start with the customer. We want to provide some value and make sure the pricing is proper. We start with the customer, and then the next part is to actually define the pricing around who it is you're targeting. And the thing to keep in mind is that when you think about the pricing itself, just the pricing, it's going to be really about this issue of your perception. Are they perceiving there's value? Are they perceiving that there's enough that you're doing for their organization? Are they perceiving that you're doing enough work that merits that amount of money? Those kinds of issues kind of come into play here. And we kind of started this whole webcast with talking about simple, structured service offerings. So I want to start with the simple part of it first, if you will. And there are two things kind of come to mind here. I find first off that this is the thing that's going to be kind of key. It's sort of the make or break portion of the entire service offering, because of that issue of if you if you price yourself too high or too low, those kinds of things, you end up losing customer interest. But if you make this too complex, I remember talking to a software company where they made their offering to, it was kind of an MSP, but SaaS-based, and they made their offering way too complex in its pricing. And it was something like, well, based on the number of devices that you have, but then if this kind of device, it's based also on the storage and the number of CPUs, and it's like, oh, this is just way too complex, because you're making it do math and like spreadsheets and all kinds of stuff just to understand how much you're charging me. If it's just something as simple as it's $6 per endpoint per month, right? That's really simple pricing. And that becomes really important, because then the customer can get an emotional connection and understand what you're doing. And I have a lot of background in marketing, and I always find that you think about this from the emotional connection side of things. If it's too complex, they lose interest because I can't associate with that. I don't get it. I don't understand why this is all negative feeling, blah, 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 negative, negative, negative. That's it. I don't want to do business with you. I don't get it. And that's how simple it is. Ali, thoughts on it being simple?
Yeah, what I would say is, and this is coming from a marketing perspective, but just understanding how easy it is to confuse somebody or overwhelm them is, I'm assuming everybody on the call today has gone to some sort of landing page and filled out a form for a trial. there are best practices for those forms, and basically every time you add a field, so let's say you started with just email, every time you add a field to that, you actually drop off significantly in the number of people that will fill out a form. Even when you're at 6 fields on the form, first name, last name, phone number, email, if you add the company line, you want to know what company they're from, you lose 10% of people who are going to fill it out. This is how I would say lazy people are, how easily confused they are, how overwhelmed they get just by small things. So if your pricing is not just that, it's $6, you're confusing a lot of people. They're not following you even as you're talking through your programs and services and stuff. And I've dealt with lots of tech companies in the past and worked with them to fix their pricing where, you know, they had 7 tiers of pricing. You need to come down to just a couple tiers to simplify it for your customer.
Yeah, perfect. So talking about that, the tiers a little bit, that brings us to the idea of making it structured. And one of the things that I find, again, from kind of a marketing standpoint, and you guys say, why are you talking about marketing? We're not really a marketing company, but you are. Because what you're doing is, even with something as simple as a service offering, you are marketing whether or not you actually understand what it is you are trying to offer to your customer. You want them to feel comfortable with you, and so that's one of the reasons why structured comes into play. You don't want to be like, well, how many devices do you have? Let me figure it out. Okay, well, it could be maybe 6. It might be $7. I'm going to kind of figure it out still. That's not what they want. They really want something that's going to establish that you have credibility, that you understand this business, that you've done it before, and that you can do it again. And so the other reason by making it structured, and you talked about tiers, Ali, and that's perfect, is it does give them options. One of the greatest negotiating tactics that you can have is to give someone permission to say no. And so let's say I actually did this in my life. I learned this many years ago where I was in Hawaii doing work, and I was flying back, and I wanted to bring my wife an actual lei with live flowers from Honolulu and bring it back on the plane with me. And so I asked the flight attendant, I'm like, hey, could I get you guys to put this into the refrigerator? Now, normally they'd say we can't do that, it's against policy. But there's a little trick there. You give them the option of saying no, and they suddenly feel like because I have a choice, that they will be more apt to choose the option you want. So I said, I'll understand if you have to say no. I just figured I'd ask. And I actually, on 3 different flights on the way home, I got them to say yes. And I brought my wife on this really nice lei that remained refrigerated the entire time, and she was thrilled, right? And so doing something like this in the same way gives customers options where they feel comfortable that, again, they know you know what you're doing and that you can help them because you've done it before. But I don't have to go spend $12 a seat per month. I can just spend, I can spend 8 or I can spend 6. It gives me a couple of options. I feel better about that. And actually, I'll stop there for a minute before we talk about an example here. I'll leave thoughts on just structuring the service offering and structuring the pricing.
Yeah, I think this is, you know, what price to charge and how to structure it. These are the crux of the problem, right? These are the 2 hardest things to determine. And what I would say in support of what you're talking about structuring it is, you know, I know a sales guy who once sent a customer a screenshot of a Windows calculator, and that was the price quote. And yeah, so
yeah,
when you talk about, yeah, that did not go over very well. When I heard that, I actually went and created a 10-page sales proposal that people had to use, and 9 pages of it was talking about the value of the service, and then, of course, the last page has the pricing on it. And instead of calling it the cost, I called it investing, your investment. And at the end of the day, I think a lot of MSPs don't come from a sales background, and they feel somehow that sales is shady or slimy. It's not. If you believe in your product, I believe that you can pitch it any way you want because you are actually improving your customer's business. So don't be shy about structuring it, polishing your presentations, things like that. There's nothing wrong with that. You're doing a good service for a small business.
Yeah, agreed. So one of the examples, Ali and I were first talking about this, one of the examples that I brought up was the idea of just the good, better, best. And actually, I think, Ali, you brought it up, and I was thinking back to, I watched sort of a show on one of the science channels about sort of the science of perception. And it went back to the pricing of popcorn in a movie theater. And if you guys ever noticed the pricing in popcorn in a movie theater, it's something like this. It's something like, well, the small, it is small, medium, and large, right? The small is going to be something like, let's say, $5. But then the medium is like $5.50. And then the large large, which is like significantly more, is actually $6. And if you think about when you go there, you start off going, well, I'll just have a small. But wait, how much is the medium? Wait, then I'll have it. Wait, the large is how much bigger? And it's only $1. Oh, I'll just have the large. And the reason why I bring that up is you can not just convey value and credibility within the pricing model itself, but you can actually also go through the process of getting customers to go to a specific pricing tier that you want them to go to. Again, you give them options, and that gives people the sense that they have a choice. And when they have a choice, they're more apt to pick the one that you want because you're demonstrating that it has more value. So kind of keep that in mind. Ali?
Yeah, there are lots and lots of videos you could watch on this. I could probably talk on that topic for half an hour at least. The example that Nick used was popcorn. I watched a video that was talking about beer. It can be any product, but basically what they did was they took the same product and they said we have the low-cost version and the high-cost version. So they only had two options. 80% of people buy the low-cost, 20% buy the high-cost. When they inserted a price in the middle of those two, now 60% buy the middle and only 20% buy the cheapest option. So they just increased their revenue significantly by introducing a middle option. When they kept those two values, but they introduced an even like super economy, cheaper option, now 20% bought the lower super economy and 60% bought the low, so they lost money on that. So never be afraid, like Nick is saying, to add like the elite enterprise version of your software program. Even if only 10% of people buy that, what you've done is you've moved people from the cheaper option up to the medium option. And you know that your average price is in the middle, but introduce a higher end cost so you're pulling people toward the middle.
Yeah, that's a great point. So in concept, we've helped you define your pricing, and then we've also helped you kind of establish the services that are in there. And so the next step for you guys would be, how do I then scale this over time? And this can be found in a couple of ways. It could be the fact that you're just trying to grow a specific service, and you're thinking about like getting more customers on this service. It could be getting a greater percentage of an environment under management. It could be that you're just adding a brand new service, and now you're trying to scale out to having additional services. And whatever the case is, there's a couple of ways to do this. And maybe, Ali, what we can do is maybe we can just go through each one of these and walk through them together. And the first one is just starting with an entry-level service. This is sort of like you don't want to have to go in, especially if you're a brand new MSP, you're not trying to go in saying, I can do everything. Because, again, remember that the service offering and the pricing and everything is supposed to demonstrate sort of the credibility around you've done this before, and therefore you can do it again. And in some cases, you may not have done it before. And so maybe the place to start is an entry-level service where you just got something that is, it's like how they've got the loss leaders at a car dealership. Well, they have one car that they sell, and it's a specific sticker number, and it's really cheap, and it's a way to drive you in to get you to look. And some people will buy that car, but other people will go, you know what, actually, I think I'd like to get something more. I mean, thoughts on that, Ali?
Yeah, the concept of a loss leader or things like that have been around forever, and it's an analogy is a wedge, right? So you're sticking the thin edge of a wedge in something, and then as you hammer the wedge in, it widens it. And the thin edge is that one a la carte service, right? So just selling AV, just selling backup, just selling hardware. If you can get your foot in the door with a customer, if you have a signed agreement with them, if they've paid you money at any point, you've basically won a customer. It is infinitely easier afterward to get more of your foot in the door to sell more services.
Yeah, agreed. So the second one is thinking about making your services, just a la carte. It's one by one, and in this case, this is more like for those customers that maybe want to be able to pick and choose. And the scaling here is from the standpoint of instead of, for example, doing, let's say, a good, better, best around one particular service, it might be more, maybe for your market, for the vertical you're going after, the size of customer that you're going after. It might be more of a way to scale by simply allowing them to pick and choose the additional services that are necessary. And in some ways, that might also be a lower barrier to entry, especially if you have we're actually going to have one of the weeks, I think we're talking about this, having recurring customer meetings and talking with the customer and finding out how you're doing. When they say, well, we're really having a problem with X, you can suggestively sell, yet another service, and it doesn't have to be something that's too tacked on. It's almost like it gives you an opportunity to to sell them on just the exact thing they need. But again, be very careful when you go down this path, because if you start doing too many things, again, back to the rules of marketing, you do too many things, you're doing one of them very well. So you gotta play this one with a balance. But in this case, it's a way of making it very easy. It's almost like having several wedges, if you will, to use your analogy earlier, Ali. Where I've got several wedges and I at least get them in a la carte with the service they want. Thoughts on that methodology?
Yeah, I actually wrote an ebook on how to price manage services a couple years ago. I refreshed it for 2016, but I think the content's still relevant. And there's a whole page on the different a la carte services you can offer. And I think at the end of the day, like Nick said, these are multiple little wedges you can use, but I more think of it as if you already have a customer relationship, let's say you got in the door supporting the server, there are 20 workstations over there on the side that if you could just get $1 per workstation per month, it adds up over time. And if you do that for all your customers, this is how you're truly going to grow monthly recurring revenue. And this goes for any subscription-based company, whether you're a SaaS company, a services company. Getting every single dollar you bring in is a $3 to $5 valuation on the company. So I want you to attack every single device and try to offer every single service, but you're not going to get there day one. Day one, you're going to get the server. You're going to get the backup. You're going to get something critical like that. Over time, you're going to be able to add those $1 here, $1 there for AV, for patch, for different services on workstations. So having an a la carte portfolio in addition to your, all-you-can-eat managed services program is what's going to allow you to get, thin edge of the wedge into those workstations or into other parts of the environment.
I think you've got a fan already. Ali, Tim is asking how to get a copy of your ebook, so maybe someone make sure to reach out to Tim after the webinar and get him a link.
Yeah, I'm going to shoot everybody my email address right now in the chat, so if you just want to shoot me an email, I'll respond with that ebook.
Yeah, perfect. And then the last one that we've got here is expanding from a central focus. And this is more like if your organization is really good at, let's say, security. I mean, most MSPs start around RMM and trying to get access to, or not access, but control over endpoints, workstation servers, and so on, and do some basic management, basic patching, things like that. But let's say that you're more focused on security, or more focused on moving people up to the cloud, whatever it is. You can start with that central focus and then expand from there. Much like you think of any business that may have, you take just something as simple as, let's say, a gas station. And the gas station started by just having gas, but then they're like, well, people are here and they stop here. Maybe we should expand from that central focus of what else could we give them. And it used to be, in a lot of cases, depending on your area of the country or the part of the world you live in, it used to be maybe adding on actual service where you could do oil changes and tire changes and things like that. And then nowadays, I live in Florida, and in this case, it ends up being more around things like having sort of little mini marts, and people want to get a drink or get a smokes or whatever they need. And they started from a central focus and grew out from there. And it's the same thing for you. Figure out what your focus is. If that's what you happen to do, you happen to be a very specific type of MSP, how do you expand beyond that? If you already have customers trusting you for one aspect of their business, what's the next logical step, the next logical growth factor, where you can say, well, let me expand and also take over, much like you just said earlier about servers and the workstations. It's just a difference of what kind of service that you're offering. Ali, thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think what it comes down to is keeping your eyes open and keeping your mind open. So not saying all I know how to do is X, so that's all I'm going to do. When you see a customer need and you already have a relationship with them, they trust you, and they'll give you a little bit of grace to fall one or two times. But keep your eyes open to those opportunities in the customer environment. Are they looking for for full virtual machine setup that you haven't done before, right? You can learn those skills and, take the contract, give it a shot, and that could open an entire new revenue stream for you. You might fail once or twice, right? You might fail a bunch of times, but if you keep your eyes open and you keep attempting these new little side jobs almost, they could grow into massive revenue streams for your business. So I think that's a great opportunity to grow revenue.
Perfect. So just a couple of final thoughts here. You want to get the pricing right and get your services right, I think is probably maybe even a better title here. And just to kind of recap everything we've talked about, getting the service offerings correct is what's going to make or break. That's really what this comes down to. If you don't do it in a way where customers understand what you're pricing, what they're getting, what the value is, they're not going to utilize your services. That's bad. We want to avoid that, of course. And so some of the things here, you want to try and make sure that it's not ad hoc. You want to have these structured offerings so that it's consistent across the board. That means, of course, you're going to have to figure out what your target customer is and what it is that they want. And so that means you really can't have necessarily a one-size-fits-all. There are going to be some people that fall out of the scope of the target customer demographic you're looking at and the service that you offer. And so if you go beyond that, it's obviously an active choice. Ali, I think you mentioned early on about maybe starting MSP and you got to get some revenue. Sure, but in concept, if you have a structured service offering and you stay there and that's what you do, that's what you become really good at. That allows you to scale because you kind of make that business predictable and then are able to grow into another business. And just the focus here that I've got, and Ali, I'd love to get some final thoughts from you as well, is focusing on, we've talked about the customer. You've got to focus on the pricing in a way that doesn't just establish what the cost is, but also, Ali, to your point, 9 pages of value, 1 page of pricing, and that's really what this is about. And then, as I mentioned before, you want to be predictable, profitable, and productive in a way that lets your business grow. So, Ali, final prices on getting this right?
Yeah. I'll give you a couple tidbits, and I've never been a managed service provider, right? But one of my skills is just listening to people and figuring out like the common problems that MSPs face. And the MSPs I've talked to, some of the really, really common challenges is they go for the all-you-can-eat fee, but then they don't factor in variable costs. So a variable cost is onboarding, right? So the time that it takes to standardize an environment, or by the time you actually get your foot in the door and you start doing a discovery on the network, and you find out that there's 5 machines with custom software, you can't possibly support these things, but now they're included in the contract. So have a fixed cost for the ongoing management because you know that's predictable. You know you're going to get 2 tickets per month per user. But have a variable cost or do it purely time and materials for some of that onboarding work or some of the other variable costs that you might come into, like hourly support, things like that with your customers. When it comes to scaling your business, I think the other thing I've heard a lot is every MSP who does custom pricing or one-off pricing for customers regrets it in the long term. Now, again, it landed them the deal, and they are where they are today because they landed a customer and they have revenue. But I would say be very careful of that custom pricing, custom projects, the one-off deals that you make for a customer, because when it comes to time at the end of the month for you to do accounting, for you to use your PSA to send out invoices, every second you spend on those custom invoices or dealing with those custom customers is really sucking at your profitability. So those are the 2 cautionary tales I'd share.
Wonderful. So let's do this. I'm going to put this questions box up here, to slide rather. If you guys got some questions, by all means, feel free to put those in the Q&A box while we're finishing up here. Do want to let you know, as I mentioned, this is the 2nd webinar in a 6-part series. Next week's webinar is going to be on service level agreements, and we'll be talking with another member of the Sullivan's MSP staff. So make sure that you look for that email coming up from Sullivan's MSP and be sure to join in on that webinar as well. And we've got, again, 4 more. There's SLAs and then 3 after that, just kind of talking about every aspect of the business and seeing how the managed service providers are doing this. So one quick question that seems to come in is, how am I supposed to price servers? Ali, do you want to take that question?
Yeah, sure. So I would say that we have a couple different recommendations, and again, it's hard. The problem with offering a price is that it doesn't make sense for every MSP of every size, doesn't make sense for every geography, but generally the rules are you would want to have a proactive program where you're kind of doing 80% of the work for a server to keep it 100% functional, and then you'd have a fully managed program where you throw in things like backup and other higher cost initiatives. So a proactive program might be in the 160 range for a server, and then a fully managed program might be a little over 200 a month for fully managed. And I think that, again, you have to take that into account into the geography that you live in, the city that you're in, the part of the city that you're in, right? There's going to be a premium downtown for certain real estate, things like that. And what I would say is, don't be shy to talk to other MSPs. If there's one thing I've noticed in my 3 years in the IT industry is that IT people like to help each other, right? Even if you're competitors, you're probably not going to give away all your secret sauce, but other people are trying to figure out this game just like you are, and usually they're happy and friendly to share some of their struggles and generally some of the things they're going through.
Yeah, perfect. You're talking about that. I'm also thinking about the fact that what's on a server, the services being provided on a server, can be vastly different too. You've got, you might have SharePoint or Exchange or just file and print services or SQL or some proprietary application, and and those things may not necessarily be included in that same service offering because now you're talking about managing, let's say, all of email and maintaining an SLA for that kind of thing. Would you agree? Yeah,
absolutely. I think it certainly is an interesting industry. I mean, I've, like I said, 3 years in it, and every day is something new, but still, some things never change, right?
Yeah, I'm at 27 years, and even though when I owned my own, when I followed the equivalent of an MSP business 20 years ago, we didn't have the tools like you have today. It was a lot of one-off work, but it was the same kind of thing. Customers that were 5, 10, 15, 20 employees, that kind of thing, trying to set them all up the same way as best as possible, keep all the machines the same, and then define the scope of services. A lot has changed in terms of the specific needs of customers, but at the same time, at the end of the day, what they're really looking for is someone they can trust who's going to have their best interest at heart, and then they're happy to compensate for the value that they see. So the only other question I saw come in, it was, can the webinars be watched later? And I'm assuming that we've got a link that we'll be sending them afterwards. Does that sound about right, Ali? I don't know on your end. I'm assuming you guys will send the link with the recording.
Yeah, I messaged the audience. We should be sending that out sometime tomorrow.
Okay.
The only other point I wanted to add is that, being an employee of a software vendor to MSPs, this is a decent source of information for you, but I'd really recommend to the average MSP, try to find the leaders in your space. And Eric Rockwell from Centrix IT out of Silicon Valley, he's one of my favorite MSP business owners. And this guy just has a heart of gold, and he goes on Reddit. He does the Ask Me Anythings. And I've watched 2 of his webinars, and they are the best pieces of content I have ever seen in this industry. He lays out how his entire business works, how he prices his programs. He says he's going to do a 15-minute Q&A, and he sticks around for an hour and a half, just answering all the questions that MSPs face. And here's a guy who's built a $10 million MSP and is on track to build a $30 million MSP in the next few years. So he knows his stuff, certainly more than I do. And I learned a lot just by attending his webinars. So if you could go on Reddit and find Eric Rockwell, I'll message that to the audience. He's just fantastic.
Yeah, no, perfect. Appreciate that very much. And I think that about does it for today. So thank you, everyone. Appreciate the time. I heard from a couple of you there's a little bit of a problem hearing my headset. I apologize. This is a different headset this week that I'm using. Normally it's really good. And I'm obviously never going to use this headset ever again. So I hope you're able to hear me just fine. Do apologize for that. But thank you very much. You've got some information there on SolarWindsMSP.com if you want to find out more about the products and services they offer. And with that, hopefully we'll see you guys next week with a better headset. But thank you very much for the time.
Thanks, everyone.